facilitate meaningful change. For me last week, this was important, this reflection, noting Michaela Cronin's National Crisis Talks invitation to myself and ensuring I stepped back to ensure Raylene, our Senior Aboriginal Policy Officer, represented DV New South Wales. This, of course, doesn't take away the ongoing issues with what we face in our space and whose voices are prioritised and represented. But it always means looking inwardly at the opportunities we have and having those harder conversations with ourselves and others. So moving on to Domestic Violence New South Wales's updates before we introduce our guest from DCJ. To say the past few weeks have been significant for our sector and our team would be an understatement. Our team has worked around the clock to not only respond to the evolving situation with the state and federal announcements, but also to work proactively to ensure our key funding asks for the sector were heard, either through media, social media, minister meetings and briefings. And in these 3 weeks, we've seen over 60 media appearances, which has been unbelievable. And I think Bridget and the team is managing 6 today. So this has been significant work. But again, none of this work has just happened overnight. This is work we've been doing over a good 12 months with the new government. So whilst we're pleased that we achieved so much, particularly with the New South Wales Government emergency funding package, we still have to keep the pressure on for increased base level funding for the sector and increased investment for housing and homelessness services. So our work certainly hasn't stopped since that announcement Monday morning. As I said in our weekly digest last week, it's not only been intense, but it has been difficult to switch off, as what we're dealing with day in, day out is in our homes and on the television and on our radios and on the news, and it can be overwhelming for us all. So I encourage everyone here to make sure they're checking in with each other and making time to intentionally switch off, which I know is hard. Today, we were pleased to see the New South Wales Government's bail amendments and have been working closely with the AG's office since we met the Premier a few weeks back. This is a positive step forward in the long overdue judicial systems review. We were particularly pleased to see that serious domestic violence offences, as well as coercive control and strangulation, have made show cause offences and been added to Section 40 of the Bail Act. Of course, we note there is still a huge amount of work to do alongside the New South Wales Government to ensure trauma-informed and safe systems. I'm sorry, I'm seeing the chat box, but I'm sure we'll answer that as soon as we can. I'll keep focus. But within that bail reform work we've been doing, we know there's much more to do, and we've been working really closely with the New South Wales Government on that, and we'll continue to do so to ensure trauma-informed and safe systems that victim survivors are consulted as experts in their own safety, and that is prioritised. A couple more updates. So Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers will hand down his 3rd budget tonight. DV New South Wales will be watching closely and aim to share the key announcements that relate to domestic and family violence with members by tomorrow afternoon. Our June sector chat will focus on coercive control as the new legislation comes into effect on the 1st of July. Please save the date for June the 11th at 1 o'clock and registrations will open soon. Importantly, to help shape the agenda, we really want to hear from you. So we've sent an email out last week, and again, the link will be shared today with a very short questionnaire, literally just 2 questions, so we can really make sure that sector chat is meaningful. Finally, as we head into the end of the financial year, which I think, again, we're coming up for thinking, how on earth are we heading towards June? But it is membership renewal time. So please look out for that email that will be in your inboxes next week. And we're delighted to share that for the 4th year in a row, we will not be increasing our membership fees. And don't forget that as members, you receive discounts for the Domestic Violence New South Wales conference in September. And we're thrilled that Tasneem Chopra is our conference MC. Links for the conference information and registrations will also be in the chat box now. So moving on to today's sector chat on staying home, leaving violence. This, as most of you know, is a long-awaited and requested sector chat from you all, and could not be more timely, noting the recent emergency package announcement, including the programme's expansion. Our speakers today are from DCJ. They are Philippa Heatherton and Jay Hardy, and they sit within the Women, Family and Community Safety team. So a bit about each of them. Jay is the Acting Manager of Domestic and Family Violence Victim Support Case Management Programs and is responsible for the DfE specialist program areas, including Staying Home Leaving Violence and the Integrated Domestic and Family Violence Service Program. Jay is passionate about supporting the sector to deliver effective best practice responses to domestic violence and has been working towards change in the DfE sector for the past 15 years across a range of government programme areas and in the non-government sector, including homelessness services and the WDV CAS. Philippa has been Director of Domestic Violence Family Interventions for the last 2 years, with responsibility for policy and programmes relating to victim survivors of domestic and family violence, and in the division in the criminal justice system. This includes oversight of the DfE Victim Support Case Management Programmes and Safer Pathway. Before joining the DCJ team, Philippa worked in senior public policy and criminal justice reform roles for over 12 years, and as a lawyer for Aboriginal organisations in the Northern Territory, Queensland and New South Wales. We're thrilled to have you both today, Jay and Pip. Take it away. Thank you.
Well, I'm pretty sure Pip is in the room as well, so I'm driving the slides. But Pip, are you there? I can see you, but I can't hear you. But thanks for that lovely introduction, Adelia. And yes, we were just saying that when we were talking about doing this sector chat back in December, we could never have known that it would be timely around a DV emergency funding package that's announced that's directly relevant to these program areas. So initially, we were just going to talk about, I guess, the programs, the program history, and some of the work we've been doing in the space. But of course, we will address the funding and the recommissioning of the program areas as well. Pip, are you there? I can't do this by myself, but maybe I can.
It's always the way, isn't it, Jay? Well, let me know if I can support. Let me know if I can support in any way, but I'm sure you're going to do a fantastic job.
Right, well,
and we can gather questions. Anything you can't answer, we'll gather.
Okay, great. Well, please take it with a grain of salt then, because there was a lot that Pip was taking on board too. I'd like to acknowledge Aboriginal people as the First Nations people of New South Wales, and also pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm coming from Awabakal country today in Newcastle, and I recognise Aboriginal people's connection to land and the Aboriginal custodians of the land that we're all meeting from today. So I was going to do a bit of an overview of the DfE case management programs, and we frame it like that because really there's the only 2 DCJ funded domestic and family violence specific case management programs across all the suites of programs. We know all targeted early intervention, family pres, specialist homelessness services, child protection. There's so much intersection with domestic and family violence, but these are really the key funded program areas that DCJ fund that has core business of responding to domestic and family violence. We've been doing a bit of work around demand and supply, some case management mapping of the services across the state, where there's overlap, where there's needs aren't being met. And I guess this also fits into the large recommissioning space of targeted early intervention and family pres that's happening at the same time, how that continuum of support, all linked in and interconnected services work together in the sector. We've also been looking at how we can better provide culturally safe services for Aboriginal communities with a couple of program reviews and a co-design on country model that we've been looking at in Western New South Wales. And then we'll talk about the New South Wales government funding announcement as well. So the current state of our recurrently funded domestic and family violence programs are really 2 major programs. So Staying Home Leaving Violence, which now has 39 contracts delivered by 32 service providers and covers 91 of the 128 LGAs across New South Wales. It's 18 million program funding, and across the state there's a very cohesive practice approach, It's a very evidence-based and evaluated program. Reporting is through SIMS. We only have one of those 32 service providers is an Aboriginal community controlled org delivering the program, which we recognise is not enough. And the University of New South Wales Gendered Violence Research Network did an evaluation in 2022, which we'll touch on. All of these contracts come to an end in 2025 at the same time. Our integrated domestic and family violence service is a smaller program area that only has 11 contracts that cover 13 LGAs. And it's about 4 million per annum program funding. And its big point of difference, I guess, is that it has capacity to work with that whole of family in response to domestic and family violence. It's very place-based and responsive to the service system that it's delivered in, need, and can work with women while they're still in a domestic and family violence relationship, whether they're planning to leave or it's not a situation that they're going to be leaving. I think there's probably more focus on children in this space as well. I think there's been some alignment with keeping child protection out of the scene with IDFES. There's been a lot of therapeutic support kind of spaces, but really the commonality around all the IDFES is that they are actually quite different in how they're delivered, based on being quite flexible and responsive to demand in that space. It's also reported through SIMS and has not been evaluated since 2018. So it is an area I think that we're really looking at building on an alternative response that can sit alongside SHLV, which is about recognising that the highest time of risk and lethality and need for support for women is in that period when the relationship has ended. So that's kind of the two key differences that we'd like to look at. They both can work with children as clients in their own right, but there's very limited funding and capacity, I think, in services to be able to do that quite broadly. But there is kind of a whole of family approach in the integrated DV service model. So staying home, leaving violence. It's funny, I was reflecting on my kind of history with this program area, because when I had to put those, the bio together, which no one likes doing, and I was mentioning that I'd worked at a DVCAS when I started in this kind of space 15 years ago. I remember reading the Australian Domestic and Family Violence Clearinghouse printed, because they sent it out to you as a printed thing, about this research on a model that was the first time I'd seen a paradigm shift where it said, why does she have to leave? Like, why can't the violence leave? And I thought it was really fascinating. And that we hadn't really looked at it in that way. And, that research was the basis for what became the Staying Home Leaving Violence pilot, which was evaluated, and it was piloted in 3 sites in Bega, Southeast Sydney, Blacktown, Mount Druitt, and then rolled out across the state a little more. And while I was working at that DVCAS, the opportunity, it expanded, and there was a SHLV in my area. And I went for the manager role at SHLV because it was so exciting, and this is exactly what I thought was a great thing. I didn't get the job, but I look at it now and think, isn't it great that I can be involved in the possible rollout of this program area across the state, because it really is, I guess, one of the first ways that we've looked at it more from a different paradigm. I think we still have a lot of work to do in the why doesn't she leave, shifting into why doesn't he stop, but that's, I guess, to do with funding as well. So the Centre for Gender-Related Violence, which I think changed to Gendered Violence Research Network down the track, in 2011 developed the evaluation framework for the program. And I think they recognised some of the principles that were really effective in these early programs was that there was service flexibility, which varied in intensity and duration based on client need. The basis was in early intervention and prevention principles. It was initially based in preventing homelessness for women and children who'd been affected by DV. So it was seen as an innovative response to homelessness, and links with legal protection and home security to increase safety for people to remain in their home with their support networks around them, and not have to uproot everybody into crisis accommodation. There's also a really key focus on local partnerships with other agencies. And another element of the program was access to duress devices, which for high-risk clients allowed a device to be worn to have immediate connection with police if there was a breach or a risk and safety. So they were kind of the key elements that were seen to be quite successful. In 2014, UNSW did another evaluation when there were only 18 services across the state, which found that overall it met its aims of increasing wellbeing, safety, and understanding of DV. There was a national audit of safe at home responses as well, which Staying Home Leaving Violence sits within, which looks to increase safety as well as financial security. And so it's looking at that long-term support for women and children who've left DV. In 2019, 5 new services were funded under the homelessness strategy, which now are part of the Staying Home Leaving Violence kind of ongoing grant funding. But that was great that expanded with a recognition that it's preventing women and children entering crisis homelessness services. And the most recent evaluation was of SHLV programs in 33 locations, which had some really positive outcomes, and I think really demonstrates that this is an evidence-based and research and driven kind of program, and why I think that maybe the government looks to it when they're looking to what works, what if we find the sector and victim survivors find useful. And unsurprisingly, it's when we're listening to what victim survivors and the sector say is needed. So in 2022 it's just so recently I was involved in this program expansion, was where there was funding to expand the existing services, the 33 services that were there, to either meet their existing demand or extend to additional LGAs in their area. There was a tender for 11 new sites as well, which was based on analysis of data, discussions with police, DCJ districts, and the capacity of service providers to deliver in these new sites. And then we looked at some pilots that I guess we're trying to maybe build off services capacity to work online and in an outreach model, which is difficult for an intensive case management program. But we were looking at kind of technology and outreach models of delivering SHLV. So the expansion kind of happened, this most recent expansion happened in 3 phases. It was 32 million over 4 years. And you can see from the map, although we expanded quite significantly, there are still quite large areas of unserviced LGAs. But phase 1 were the existing Staying Home Leaving Violence programs that increased their service levels or footprint. In phase 2, we looked at 11 new locations across the state for services to be able to deliver it in, which had a really high demand and not many DFE specialist case management services. And phase 3, as I mentioned, are these kind of innovative models of how you deliver SHLV, which later this year will be evaluated, and we'll be looking to maybe embed some of those findings and learnings about how you can successfully deliver utilising technology and outreach into mainstream SHLV program areas. So that's in our kind of program specifications review and update for the new recommissioning. Excuse me. Let me just check I didn't have anything else to say there. Yeah, that's kind of it. So the SHLV evaluation that was just last year, completed by the UNSW Gendered Violence Research Network, found some really positive outcomes that overall the program was able to deliver what it kind of set out to do. broadly speaking, clients reported feeling safe or safer in their home, having an improved knowledge about dealing with domestic and family violence, and were assisted to find or sustain stable accommodation. So they're pretty key. And I think the success reflected the integrated nature of the program, how important needs-based intensive case management is for women leaving domestic and family violence. And I guess the fourth pillar of safe at home responses is addressing economic insecurity. And this is a really, I guess, big part of a program where the crisis and the intensive case management kind of takes precedence. It's really difficult for case managers to find time to support clients to have more economic literacy, but support around training, education, and links with financial counsellors is kind of one of the long-term goals and outcomes for children to be able to sustain their accommodation and safety. Another thing that isn't flagged here, but it really comes through in the evaluation and also some of the reviews and consultations we've been doing recently, is just how important the skilled and empathetic nature of the caseworkers were in women who were sustained, I guess, safety and accommodation. The connections with community and services were mentioned a lot about how important the relationship with caseworkers were in this space. And I think because this is one of the few areas where I think eligibility and also that it's not a time limited program. I think that's really key in this. It's client led, and the relationship that's built up with providers, with victim survivors, means that changes to their relationship, changes to their situation, they always know they can reach back out again when things might change. They're not feeling judged and they feel supported. So that came through a lot and was really important, I think, recognising the kind of skilled workforce and base that makes up the success of this program. So IDFES, which, gosh, I'd like to change the name of it. As you can see, much smaller footprint across the state, is almost kind of a navigator of all the multiple services that people might need when they're leaving domestic and family violence or have reached out for help and are still living in violence. So they can also work with the person using violence if it's safe and appropriate to do so. So we're finding in some discussions with IDFES this isn't a big part of the program area. It's really about supports for women and their children, but it is key that they can work with women while they're still in the relationship. And there are situations where anyone that works in the sector knows a key question that someone will ask is what will happen to him? Where will he go? Will he have accommodation? You know, he's still the father of my kids and we'll need to see him. So I think this approach of being able to work kind of in a family-centered and whole of family way is really important and probably a space we need to build up and move into. And I think IDFES has the capacity to kind of have that more whole of family approach moving forward. So it really does respond to a gap in the service system by providing services to women still living with violence over time, building up their capacity. And as I said, it's really varied how it's delivered. It's always therapeutic. It's always kind of wraparound services and linking in with existing services. But yes, really key differences in all the areas that I think are based on a place-based response. So it has not been evaluated since 2018. So this is a very old point in time reflection, but I think some of the recommendations are in line with the work we're doing to maybe review and revise the program guidelines so that it can continue to be best practice, work within a trauma-informed framework, and recognise that for culturally linguistically diverse people and Aboriginal families and communities, you know, expecting them to leave the relationship and to leave the violence to access support is kind of unrealistic and a narrow approach. I also think some of the workforce survey, the recommendations around providing training and support for the sector is also embedded in some of the workforce survey and the 10-year plan around supporting the DV sector to have more current and accessible training. That's another thing I'm really passionate about, is ensuring the sector can have accessible, funded training to enable them to actually deliver what these programs that are seem to be successful. We actually need to support the sector to be able to deliver those. So I'm hoping, oh, there's Pip. Hi, Pip. She's online. So this next section around demand and supply and some of the DFE case management mapping we've been doing, I'll let Pip talk to, and you can just tell me when to change the slides, Pip.
Thanks, Jay, and hi everybody. Sorry, I've just had a whole series of computer problems this morning, which manifested at exactly the wrong moment, i.e. 2 minutes into the meeting. So apologies for being a little bit absent at the start, and thank you to Jay for picking up so brilliantly. Thanks also to Delia and the team at DV New South Wales for having us today. It's extraordinary work that you do, and incredibly helpful for us, and an opportunity for us to be able to talk to the sector through the forum that you've organised. So thank you for that. My section, or this next section of our kind of presentation, is a bit drier, but really where it stems from is, I mean, as you would all be very aware, the contracts for the current commissioning cycle for IDFPS and for SHLV are all aligned now to June 25. And in preparation for that, we've been doing a range of things to try and assist ourselves to better understand the programs that, as they are run across the state, to both in terms of kind of need and supply, which is the next section that we're going to talk about, but as Jay's going to come back to a bit later, in terms of understanding how we deliver services to particular types of clients, so particularly Aboriginal people, but generally to just see if we can better understand the program as we get into a stage of needing to make some decisions about how to run the next stage of the commissioning cycle. So if we go to the next slide, Jay, like these first slides, they're probably not unfamiliar to you either, but they're kind of at a broad brush view of some of the mapping work that we've been trying to do to understand the spread of programs and the spread of need. So this first slide shows us LGAs with a high volume of DV, so like high numbers essentially, and as you can see, it's very heavily concentrated along the eastern seaboard in some ways. Obviously that's where our big population centres are, and so you can see there are also particular districts within sort of the Greater Sydney region where there is significantly high numbers of people experiencing DV, and it's a really high percentage of the DV in the state, if you like, concentrated in these high population areas and some specific ones. If we go to the next map, it almost shows essentially the inverse. So what this map is showing is the rate of DV. So within a particular community, the number of people who are experiencing DV compared to the size of the population. And as you can see, while the volume, so that while the numbers of people who are directly affected are actually much lower in, say, Western New South Wales, and you can see the spread of where the blue gets darker or lighter. But nevertheless, the nature of the problem is different, and potentially, I guess, I won't use the word more extreme, but there's a higher level compared to the rate of the population, which suggests something about potentially a slightly different response might be required. And I think also, if we go just quickly to the next slide as well, it shows you something quite similar to this one, except in a graphical form. So rather than seeing the map of the state, what you can see is a comparison really between, the one before, Jay, the level of DV that's being experienced in Greater Sydney compared to regional New South Wales. So you can see in both of those lines are trending up. The one in regional New South Wales is trending up more and is significantly higher in terms of the rate of people experiencing DV per head of population. We haven't got this quite in this order in our slides, but I think it's probably worth just like quickly running back to slide 7 in our slide deck that Jay's already shown you. But what you can see there also is that's essentially a mapping of SHLV across New South Wales, and you can also see there, like, even just by looking at these maps, which is not, you know, a relatively crude way of looking at it, but nevertheless, there's a lot of services in some parts of the states, or more services in some parts of the states, and a clear lack of services in other parts of the state. Sorry, Jay, but jumping around. But we might go back to, so the slide after that then is just a very brief starting to summarise some of the work we've tried to do to understand what's the difference then between, in a more nuanced way or a more detailed way, between those maps where you can clearly see the levels of need and where the services are for SHLV and what that gap might be. So some of the things we've been trying to do to understand that better is to look at SHLV, which is our largest specialist DV case management program that we run through DCJ, but also to try and understand how that looks if you start to also map against some of the other DV services that are run elsewhere. So, well, IDF is one, which is also run by us, but also WDV CAS, some of the special homelessness services, refuges. What does it start to look like in terms of service provision versus the level of need if you start looking at it a little bit more broadly? And the purpose of that was to try and just get a bit more strategic about thinking through next steps. I have to say, at the time that we started this work, we thought it was a bit speculative in the sense of, we had a certain funding amount and there wasn't particularly clear to us that there was appetite for us to seek further funding. Obviously, in the last couple of weeks, that's significantly changed. So we're glad to have the work, essentially, because now there are some new decision points really for government around how to distribute an expanded pool of funding when we know that the existing pool wasn't sufficient to cover the level of need that's out there. So briefly, some of the kind of findings on geographical gaps. This is pretty simple, but essentially, like as you would probably know or have some sense of anyway, that SHLV is currently funded in 91 LGAs, but there are 37 that don't have any SHLV service. 3% of LGAs don't have any DF-related service at all. If we look at the capacity of SHLV services to meet demand within the designated region that they're currently funded for, we think that's a bit uneven. We also think there's quite uneven distribution of other specialist DV and non-specialist DV services across New South Wales. And as you could see from those maps, even in terms of need and supply, there's significant service gaps in Western New South Wales and in a number of other regions as well. We also tried to think a bit about what can't we see. So a lot of this work you'd be aware, we've looked at administrative data sets, it's desktop-based research. We've also been working with a consultancy to help us work through it, and some of you or many of you may be aware that we also did a survey to try and understand a bit more about the nature of the services or the different kinds of services that are delivered across DFE service providers. And that's been built into this as well. But there are still many things that we can't see. And the survey was intended to try and help us see some of those. And just one insight from that survey I thought was interesting to have just to bring in today was just this this statistic from our survey around just the extent of the proportion of services that have wait lists and their perceptions about whether they are increasing in the last 3 years. And in both cases, there are quite a large number of services who have wait lists, and also the perception is that they are increasing. We're also aware that services not having wait lists doesn't necessarily mean that that they are meeting all of the demand that there is in that area. But it's the beginning of a way to try and start to think through, well, what other ways can we understand better what is the nature and the level of the gap that we have, including for places where we have services already running. So we're not just assuming that because there is a service there that meets the need, but how can we better start to understand those things? Jay and I we would always plan to do a bit of a tag team, so I'm going to hand back to Jay to talk about some of the other work we've been doing, which is more around the qualitatively the nature of the programs that we're all involved in, and at the end we might talk just briefly about the recent funding announcement. So I'll hand back to Jay.
Thanks, Pip. Really glad you're here. So a positive thing about Staying Home Leaving Violence is its uptake and support of First Nations community. I think in 2021, more than 1 in 4 clients identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And we recognised that some of the outcomes for community weren't the same in terms of sustaining accommodation. The other outcomes were quite positive, but I think our evaluation in 2022 kind of highlighted that there might be a need for looking at how SHLV works with Aboriginal communities and trying to embed some of the more successful elements of that in the broader program guidelines in the future. SHLV was also called out in the Families Culture Review because it recommended rolling it out across the state and that DCJ caseworkers can connect families with SHLV services if they present with DV and housing difficulties. So it's I think it's a really positive and important part that it's alongside and not seen as child protection. It is a support for families and not part of the DCJ kind of service response in terms of child protection, because we know there's some barriers to accessing and trust around that kind of support, which is very valid. And so we really wanted to build on what worked in SHLV in that space. So last year we undertook kind of 2 projects. One was to review the services statewide to inform best practice and program specs. And the other was working with an Aboriginal community controlled organisation to co-design a more culturally safe model that's tailored for remote communities, because it really is not a model that I guess can be, since it's based so much on integrated service delivery, if you have very minimal services to integrate with, it's not really a model that can work. And you know, a lot of victim survivors live in regional areas, which I think we needed to focus on. And also, you know, it was identified that the resources are more intense for regional and rural SHLV services than they are in the metro areas, which hopefully we'll be reflecting in our funding as well. So we engaged Inside Policy, an Aboriginal-owned consulting firm, to consult with community, with service providers and ex-clients of staying home leaving violence. And there was really great how open and supportive of the process our SHLV services and the communities that were engaged were. And the report's finalised, but it's not public yet. But some of the key, I guess, findings around recognising how to make the program more culturally safe and accessible was recognising that, you know, home may be defined differently, and that a more appropriate service goal may be remaining in community or a community of their choice, because it's a very, I guess, white framework to say home is consistent and safe accommodation that we're working from in that model. So home and safety had a broader meaning than what's in our SHLV program specs and guidelines. Home might mean being supported to be mobile, being supported to be on country and with extended family and kin, which, you know, I guess one of the thoughts around how do we embed cultural safety into as a program outcome might really reflect a more flexible way of working. So they suggested a few options around how we might make cultural safety embedded in program delivery. They're probably not a surprise to anyone. I think there was a focus on supporting use of brokerage for culturally safe spaces and activities, and healing activities was kind of flagged, which I think maybe the focus is really on security and safety upgrades, and maybe we need to broaden that definition for some brokerage usage. And it's a program area that doesn't have identified positions in it as well. We do leave that open to service providers, how they staff SHLV, but that was another suggestion. I think we really recognise we need to increase the number of ACOs that can deliver the program, rather than kind of being definitive around the type of staffing they need, maybe supporting the resourcing, the ability for services to have identified positions. So hopefully we'll be able to publish that report soon. Inside Policy will be doing a bit of an update and a review to the Staying Home Leaving Violence online forum that we have this month, and with some of the findings, and there'll be a community summary that's provided to community that engaged in the consultation as well. So the key things that came through as well was greater flexibility of the eligibility criteria for Aboriginal families to be able to have their needs met. Found that this might include being able to work with women who continue engagement or relationship with the person using violence, working alongside men who use violence to support the needs of the women and children holistically, and including cultural safety as a key outcome in the program guidelines. You can see why I think we have space in IDFVS to kind of build some of this in, but there might need to be some, I guess, flexibility of the way we interpret staying home leaving violence, or some of the strengths in the model, and how that's delivered without diluting the integrity of the model, which is something I'm really feel really strongly about, that SHLV works because it is delivered the same way across the state. But we also have to recognise where it's not suitable and how we can support through maybe alternate models or alternate programs. Our other project is co-designing and piloting an on-country SHLV model in Western New South Wales. So DCJ has been working with Murdi-Paki Regional Assembly to look at what a community-led model might look like. We've got a bit of a framework developed currently that, really considers what we've kind of mentioned, that Aboriginal women may be unable or unwilling to fragment their identity by leaving the community, kin, family or partners as the solution to violence, which I think our service model kind of requires. The Community Working Party members and community also mentioned that community already does a lot to support women experiencing family violence, and maybe there are services that need to recognise that there's already a big part of support, whether that's being that safe house that we were talking about that's needed for community, whether it's looking after kids, whether it's supporting and being a kind of a breathing space for the person using violence. The community is actually really involved already in keeping women and children safe in that space. So when we talked about safe houses, there was a different interpretation of what that might look like as well. A safe house model, I think, in our SHS space is a very admin heavy intake process where it's about you finding new accommodation to move to. And we were hearing that, sometimes it needs to be a short-term respite basis that's client-led. They know when they're safe or unsafe, and you need to create the space for people to be able to keep their family safe when they know that there will be violence. So this was also looking at the entire family, and access to culturally safe places for healing, as well as accommodation options for him. And I am using gendered language because SHLV is working with women and children in this space. And how important it is to staff the program from community, and also keep community voice in the governance of this pilot and implementation. So it really is, community-led. So I'm really excited about this, and hopefully this will be piloted and possibly be the basis for place-based models in other communities as well, moving forward. Was there anything else I was going to say about that one? All my notes, and I'm just talking off the cuff. I'm sorry, my timing's probably terrible as well. Yeah, no, that's all. Back to you, Pip.
All right, great. So this section, we've got a slide which is on the recent budget announcement. I'm sure you're all very aware of it. It's quite a substantial increase in funding for SHLV and IDFVS. So it was $48 million over 4 years. So that equates to around an $8 million increase per annum for SHLV and $4 million for IDFVS. We are still to get formal confirmation of the exact figures, any constraints around the distribution of funding, and exactly the year-by-year breakdown. So we are a little bit constrained in what we can say. And also, I would have to say that we, while we're extremely pleased and about the extension funding, we haven't. We've had to somewhat shift our thinking that we had previously been undertaking about the nature of the next recommissioning or the next commissioning round. So I suppose that I've got some limited comments to make about that today, and we will of course be in touch as soon as we are able to say anything more concrete. I suppose a couple of things I would say about that is One is that given the very recent expansion of SHLV and also a pretty recent positive evaluation of the model, we are looking to simplify the tender process where possible for existing SHLV providers. We think, there's a huge amount of value in not disrupting existing services which have only been recently expanded, maintaining the current skilled workforce, not interfering in a well-run program more than is necessary to move forward. So I suppose that's probably all I can say about that. And while we are still waiting on confirmation of exactly the expectations about the funding and the exact breakdown, I think it's pretty clear that there is a clear government commitment to expanding SHLV statewide, and so that's in place. The IDFPS funding is we're really pleased about as well for some of the things we've talked about in this presentation, including the fact that it's potentially a broader model which looks at a more family-centric response and a more place-based response. And the fact that that's been funded, I think, is a pretty good indication that there is support within government at a more general level about some expansion of the DFE response model to provide more support for children and young people, for looking at potentially slightly wider and potentially longer term supports. So looking more at kind of counselling or other therapeutic supports as being a key part of the DFE programs that we are able to fund and deliver. So that's another positive thing. I suppose also based on earlier things we've said in our presentation, I think you can see that we're trying to understand better the sort of uneven geographic coverage of DV services and map it against high levels of need. And we are we would make recommendations about the distribution of funding based on that more comprehensive and detailed analysis of need and service availability in terms of exactly how the additional funding is then provided. And lastly, also building on the work around looking at a co-designed pilot service in Western New South Wales, we'll be looking to see whether that's part of the model that we can expand through this funding package, so that we find ways to expand in that very empty-looking map of Western New South Wales in a way that is more culturally appropriate and driven by local communities. I think that's probably as much as we can really say at the moment about how that funding will then move forward. Some of that funding is in the next financial year. Sorry, there was a question earlier which I didn't answer in the chat because I think the answer isn't entirely simple. The full funding amount per annum is not reflected in the next financial year, but some of that funding is available. So there's a sort of stepping up, but we'll need to come back to you about the exact nature of how that flows through. And that's our presentation.
Thank you, Pip and Jay. I just want to, I'm sure these are thoughts people are having, but just to acknowledge that the members have wanted sight over this expansion since 2022, and coming in and being transparent and open is really, really valued. I think there's definitely some questions I'll be managing in the chat box if you're free to take them. And I guess we would love to have ongoing dialogue with you as well, because I know we do field a number of queries. But Jay, loving off the cuff, by the way. So that was great hearing about your experience and insights. And Pip, I'm glad you made it with the tech issue. So thank you both very much. I'll start reading through some of the questions and then open the floor to our members. So thanks again. So we'll start. I think Pip's responded to some. If you don't feel that maybe Pip has, can you pop your hand up? But I'll start with Dale, who said, with the Western New South Wales co-design, was there any consultation with current staying home leaving violence providers in the region?
Jay, do you want me to start, or do you want to? I can start. Not so far. So it is a co-design process. The key party that we're working is the Murdypaki Regional Assembly, and of course they represent 16 different communities. So the process has been in a large extent driven by how they wanted to engage with us, and they also did a lot of internal engagement amongst their own members and the communities that they represent. So at this stage, no, there hasn't. Not to say that there won't be in future, but that there is. And I have to say also that the funding package has changed things a little bit as well, because we had pretty limited funding related to that. But I guess the frank answer is not at this stage.
And the pilot was specifically we're looking at areas that don't have coverage by an SHLV service currently. So it was for an Aboriginal delivered model that's designed and piloted by Aboriginal community. So it's not stepping on another service's toes, essentially.
Thank you. So Rowena asks, how will orgs in the new LGAs apply, or will it be by invite only?
I don't think we can answer that at this point. So we weren't expecting to have new LGAs to deliver services in until pretty recently. So I don't think we can really give you a clear answer on that at the moment, but we will as soon as we're able to.
And I hope I'm not overstepping, but in our role as Peak, what we will do, Pip, is ensure our members' thoughts on that are definitely fed into DCJ.
Yeah, we'd be very happy to hear that.
Excellent stuff. So Dale's also asked, you also spoke about access to women's safe houses. Did the consultation also include current providers of the women's safe houses?
Well, that was a big part of the discussion around safe houses. Was the understanding of an existing safe house was very different to what was required, or what what it needed to look like and feel like for Aboriginal communities to feel effective, because they were in Medipack Regional Assembly Community Working Party members were kind of saying there used to be a safe house. The district was saying there is a safe house, but I guess if it's not utilised or accessed by community, it's not the type of safe house they want. So we are only in the initial framework and design part of this model. So the consultation about how and what it looks like, we're not bringing in other safe house, I guess, service providers at this time, because it was about hearing what it needs to look like rather than what's currently there, which we fund and know.
Thanks, Jay. And Dale, I think you had your hand up, but I'll keep moving. And if you wanted to query again, I'll check in. So Joanne's asking, will the existing staying home leaving violence providers also go to tender, and what would be the process? And I guess that might be Pip's answer around not knowing that yet or being clear. But again, if there is feedback, everyone, we will be taking it and making sure there's avenues to pass feedback in. Does anyone want to add to that in case I didn't? Okay, so Sue's asking, how will the integrated domestic and family violence service program work with the staying home leaving violence program?
There are some districts that currently have a staying home leaving violence and an integrated domestic and family violence service. So I think when there's that continuity of some of the services talked about working alongside SHLVs, where that change in the victim survivors kind of status, relationship status, or need and intensity of supports changed, that they were able to work collaboratively with them in that space. There are some providers that have both program areas as well under the one service provider kind of delivery. So I think it is actually something that complements SHLV in that space. And that's why we were also interested in what the targeted early intervention and family pres landscape looks like as well, because I think it kind of fits within that continuity of care, like, or that continuity of service delivery as well. So essentially, the big side of it is that eligibility is quite different, but they do work collaboratively. And of course, you know, the sector with so many unfortunate kind of no wrong door approaches to the way we work with people that don't turn away people who are essentially on the program guidelines aren't eligible. There's always flexibility about understanding a person's point in time, their needs, and being client-led and responsive. So I think it might be similar in its outcomes, but different in its approach. And from what we've seen, which is a small number of IDFSs, it's very complementary.
Yeah, noting there's 11, I guess it's going to be interesting with a much larger expansion of staying home leaving violence versus the that program, which again we'll keep an eye on.
And there are very few that are under, aren't able to meet, service numbers. So I don't think another support service alongside there is going to be a kind of a taking business away, so to speak, in terms of service provision.
Okay, so our next question is from the MCAS manager. Although in 2022 it was announced snowy Monaro region, however, the majority of the region is not covered at all. Therefore, it is misleading to say that the Snowy Mountains LGA, because the majority of the area, including victim survivors, are not supported with staying home leaving violence.
Yes, Caroline, you're totally right. It's a large LGA. And I guess when we're looking at what we cover across the state, there might be some, space to talk to districts and service providers about what makes more sense for a service to cover as a service geographic footprint in the recommissioning process as well.
That wasn't
wasn't
me,
you?
Cass. No,
Sorry, I just
no,
assumed
but
it
I
was you.
support MCAS is Cooma based, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, Caroline.
Amazing. I was thinking, hello, Caroline, didn't know you were there. So Gabrielle's asked, can existing staying home leaving violence programs tend to expand if under-resourced? And if so, will that affect or guide what new LGAs can expect?
So I think can't give you a complete answer to this right now, but I think the mapping that we've been trying to do is trying to understand what's happening within LGAs as well as across LGAs. So one of the things that we will do is to try and understand whether there are LGAs where potentially there might be a provider, but they're actually like less resourced comparatively to another LGA where there's also already an SHLB provider. So definitely we're kind of conscious of the issue. We're trying to understand what that might look like across all the LGAs that do have a provider. I can't really tell you exactly more than that about how we'll manage that through a tendering process, but we're conscious of the issue, and we're keen to try and make sure that we can understand that at a level of detail that allows us to then act on that.
Okay, and I think this has maybe been started in terms of this question, but just building on it again, will the Snowy Staying Home Leaving Violence programme be expanded to cover the whole area? Or is that where you're saying you're aware of that issue and that needs to be? Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to, just before I go to Dale quickly, if Dale still wants to check in, is it possible, Pip and Jay, that our members have an email, or would it be appropriate if we pass our email and start funneling any queries, just because it'd be good to be able to keep this conversation going? It's been something, as you both know, that has been something our members have wanted to know a lot about for a while, and I think transparency and communication is going to be really valued from here on, and it's appreciated today. Dale, did you want to finish off on anything? I saw your hand up, but happy to, if you wanted to email admin if you needed to after today's session.
I did put it up and then pulled it down. I just wanted
Sorry.
Jay, I just wanted to let you know that there are actually 5 women's safe houses in the Western region, always pretty well at capacity. 2 of those women's safe houses are 100% staffed by Aboriginal people. And I think that you guys are missing some important information if you don't start consulting with those providers who currently provide services within the region. You know, we may be non-ACO services, but we certainly have Aboriginal staff that work for us who could give you some valued information and knowledge.
I totally agree, Dale, and it'll be the next stage in the design kind of and delivery process with that engagement.
Great, that's great.
Awesome, thank you, Dale. And last question is going to be Maria, and then we'll point to our admin email address for follow-up questions. Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria from the Women's Cottage in Hawkesbury, out of northern West Sydney. Pip, you were talking about wanting to see what you weren't seeing, you know, as part of that. And the Women's Cottage has been the frontline DV service in the Hawkesbury for 40 years, but we're not recognised as such within the funding policy of New South Wales. So there are things, and that's the case all over regional New South Wales. There's services that are the frontline DV services that are providing casework support for women across the whole spectrum. So I'm really concerned that if that recognition continues to continue, you're just not going to know what's happening in terms of, or what could be happening in terms of increasing the resources of the services that are already operating. And also there's a weakness in the assumption that if you've got a staying home living violence service in one LGA that's funded to do outreach in another LGA, that's meeting the need. And it's certainly not meeting the place-based needs, and it's certainly not meeting the need if you've got an urban area like Penrith, with all its complexities, trying to meet what is almost a regional remote area of the Hawkesbury. So if there's not some sense of our outreach resources may not be meeting the need, and you're only going to look at your map that's already blank, you're going to miss a lot, and so are the communities that we're already working with.
Oh yeah, look, I'm conscious, like, yeah, I mean, mapping is a useful, you know, it's like these big sort of attempts to do kind of you know, desktop-based kind of administrative data set research. It takes you a certain way. It clearly doesn't take you the whole way. Like we know that. We've tried to supplement it a bit by doing some survey responses. That only takes you a little bit further as well. And then, you know, so we are very conscious that that we need to be careful about how much we rely on these kinds of tools. Like, they're very useful and powerful when you have to, you know, like, ultimately there's a point where government has to look at the entire state and try and work out what's the best way to reach as many people as possible in the best way that we can within the envelope that we have, which is expanded. But it only takes you part of that way. So we're very conscious that we'll be needing, like, we would start with our district officers in terms of trying to get their insight and understanding about a much more localised understanding of the area. And we'll certainly do as much as we can to try and make sure that we verify what we can see, what we can see from that kind of big, you know, necessarily rather high level kind of mapping exercise. What we do think is we can get further, we can do more with that than we often do. We often just have, I mean, as you say, just like knowing that there's an SHLV service or any kind of service in a particular LGA tells you very little about whether it's meeting demand or not. We absolutely know that. We're trying to we think we can squeeze more out of that way of understanding, but it's by no means the whole picture, and we're really conscious that we need to engage as a starting point, really, with district officers about trying to just validate whether what that appears to show us is right when you look at that particular area.
And it's a welcome invitation, Jay and Pip, that the members and the evidence base that sits behind this peak is unbelievable, and that accountability for us is key now going forward with as we expand this programme. And I think having not been able to have sites since 2022 has been tough for some of the members. So I think it's key now that we keep that ongoing communication together. We really value it. And I guess it's an invitation from here on. How can our members and us inform you as it's expanded? I know you have to work at pace and things get dropped and then you've got to go. But just before you sign off, how can we support you as this programme is expanded and the members here? How can we provide that evidence base? What do you need? Or is that ongoing conversation with the peak?
I think it's an ongoing conversation with the peak, and you've been very clear that that's something that you offer, and it's very welcome. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. Is when we get more confirmation internally, we'll continue to relay it through you if we can. Is ideal for us. But yeah, I think it's an ongoing conversation.
Fantastic. Well, we welcome that, and we really appreciate you both coming in today. We'll finish there. So we'll keep talking, everybody, and as information becomes available, we'll be sharing it, and we might even have a follow-up session if we need to at some point. But if you have further queries for Philippa or Jay, if you email admin@dvnsw.org.au, we'll shoot them through to them. And huge thanks for you both making yourselves available for today, and thanks members for being here. We had up to 96 of you today, so yeah, want to hear more from you, and thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks.